In The Wisdom of the Hive, you both write about bees as a superorganism. And I thought that was very interesting. I'd never even heard that term before. What does it mean that bees form a hive and that becomes a superorganism?
I think about this a lot and feel into this word of superorganism and the energy it contains. And there are other superorganisms as well, like ants are superorganisms. And what it means is that an individual bee does not think of themselves as separate from the hive or the whole. They don't even embody that kind of way of being or thinking. Their consciousness is shaped around the reality that they are part of the entire hive. And it's not just the bees. The honeycomb is part of the superorganism. The vibration and sound is part of the superorganism. The movement, all of the things they bring into the hive. Propolis, which is tree resin mixed with an enzyme from the bees, which protects each cell of honeycomb and seals the hive. That's part of the superorganism. Pollen is part of the superorganism, nectar that they then transform into honey. And I imagine there are other things that are part of the superorganism that humans actually don't understand because we're not honeybees. But it means they understand that everything that they do is for the good of the hive, for the collective hive, to sustain the hive and support future generations. And I think about this a lot because I feel like this is the energy humanity needs to embody and adopt in so many ways because so much of our conditioning can be about individualism and how we're separate instead of how we are connected to the whole. And so much of our conditioning can be about the here and now. And we can feel separated from the past and also the future. And bees are immersed in their work to sustain a hive. Some of the time, they won't even experience the benefit of the nectar that they're bringing in. They're creating it for the future because of their life cycle, which is quite short, depending on the season and where the bees live. So that's what a superorganism is. It's one whole hive or body that is working together to sustain the organism, including all of the different parts of that space.
Now, you mentioned ants are also a superorganism. Are there any other superorganisms that we know?
Termites are superorganisms as well. And there are a few others.
This is actually not a superorganism, but there's a unity consciousness that the bees have that can be mirrored and paralleled kind of in the way that schools of fish move at the same time, or starlings. So for us, I think part of the beauty of the metaphor of it, and that's what Michelle and I were really drawn to in writing this book, is how the bees can be such a metaphor, as Michelle said, for us as human beings. Imagine if we cared so much about one another and the collective survival of our planet and each other that we acted in concert like the bees did, that we did things in harmony, that we didn't destroy each other or destroy our resources, but only worked for the good of the collective. It blows our minds how beautiful and deep a lesson that is, and how deeply we wish that we as human beings acted that way.
That's what it brings up for me. I wonder if that could be part of humanity's future, at least as a metaphor. I think that's part of what you're pointing to in The Wisdom of the Hive, is that perhaps this is something we can learn and take and see modeled by the bees. Now, you also refer to bees as an indicator species, and I wonder what their current state of health, from your perspective, is indicating.
I was just thinking about indicator species. So penguins are also an indicator species. And what this means is that how well they're doing is connected to how well we're actually doing as humans. And of course, we're deeply connected to them and the more than human world and the ecosphere. And there's different information out there, scientific information about how the honeybees are doing on colony collapse is often what it's called. They're also subject to varroa mites, for example, and other pests or invaders to their hive. Of course, what we're doing to the planet affects the health of the honeybees as well. So climate chaos is forcing bees and other pollinators, I'd say, in other parts of the ecosystem to have to adapt based on our behavior. And they're being asked to adapt rather quickly and in ways that feel untenable to me. And yet, bees have been around for millions of years. They have survived in so many ways for this long. And it makes me wonder what they're doing to adapt and to survive. And yet we know there's so many factors influencing their health negatively, I would say. And, we are bee lovers and tend our bees in hive boxes, which is not actually how a bee would live. They typically would live in a tree. So often I think about this too. I care about them and I take care of them as much as I can. And I recognize that even in the way I am tending them, that while I'm a more natural beekeeper, it's not exactly the same as the way they would choose to live and to be. So I'm constantly learning from other natural beekeepers about how to tend the bees in a way that really aligns with the way they want to live. Colony collapse is still happening. We've both lost hives. And at times when we shouldn't have lost them, the winters, the weather's unpredictable, the temperature change, it's really cold and it gets really warm, and they break cluster, right? And they go out and get resources, and then it takes energy to cluster back together during the winter and even to stay warm. And so there are these ways we know they're not doing well because we've experienced the loss of hives to, I would say, climate chaos in our behavior. And I'm holding on to this idea that the bees embody wisdom that has allowed them to survive for so long.
Amy, anything to add to that?
Yeah, as an indicator species, I think about the canary in the coal mine, right? Like in some ways, if the bees can't survive, we can't survive. 1 out of every 3 bites of food we eat is pollinated by bees and other pollinators. And so I do think that there is an indication, as we've seen in many species right now, and the climate collapse that's happening, that no, this is not a good sign. And what I love that Michelle brought to the book in the first chapter is this idea from our friend and fellow bee tender, Ariella Daly, that maybe the bees are here to save us, as opposed to this campaign that we have to work hard to save the bees. The reason we wrote this book is, what if we studied them, followed them, believed in them enough that we acted with them and like them in ways that could help us change how we show up in the world and on the planet in more gentle, holistic, life-giving ways. We don't want to lose the bees, lose any of the species on the planet. But I hope they have a wisdom to survive. What I want us to take from this is they're showing us what we need to shift.